We are back with another edition of the Ad Podcast. And today we have Patrick Ward, who's the Vice President of Marketing at Media.Monks, a full-service consultancy and design shop inside of S4 Capital, led by Sir Martin Sorrell, the former chairman of WPP. And he has worked on a number of blue chip clients, companies like Google, Nike, Walmart, just to name a few. And Patrick is also a LinkedIn top voice and has the coveted blue check on LinkedIn, which establishes him as a thought leader and a key opinion leader on the platform. Patrick, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just hop right in. You've accomplished quite a bit throughout your career. You've wrote a couple of marketing books. You've led marketing both inside the agency space, but also inside a brand, especially in the Fintech world. Do you want to give us a little bit of the cliff notes so the viewers have a little bit of context of, where you're coming from and how your marketing philosophy has evolved throughout your career?
Yeah, for me, it was very simple. Like many marketers, started with a degree in marketing. That was my third attempt at a major. I tried economics and flunked out of that one. I tried finance, funnily enough, and didn't do so well there. Then I did marketing and came second in a course out of hundreds of students and figured, I've got something here.
Yeah. So, something you can build on, right?
Exactly. So started like many in the 2010s in the agency world, very quickly came across to America because, as my accent belies, my native Australia, love it dearly. The advertising industry, not particularly mature. And I wanted to test myself with the world's very best. And there is no better place in the world for advertising than the United States. So moved over here, spent a lot of time, as you mentioned, with financial services before finding my way into technology, both on agency side and brand side. It's always been in cases of leadership, whether it's been leading a team of one, i.e. myself as a solo practitioner, but very quickly building out large teams. That was something that was always a focus for me, even at the very start of my career. When I started at 17, 18 years of age, I very quickly, within a year, got promoted to a content manager leading a small team. And that was explicitly because I said, that is my focus. Like, I understand that my best attributes are getting the best out of very talented people who are more talented in their very specific domains of marketing than I am. But I know the right levers to push and know the right ways to get the best out of a team. And if they succeed, I succeed, and companies and brands succeed.
Yeah, I love that. In a prior interview, I didn't actually write this question down, but your last answer provoked it. So you talked about in an interview about the idea that, most people are holding on to about 51% effort to try and, do just enough to stay relevant and do, just as enough not to be fired. I think during the pandemic, we got a fun branding of this type of behavior, the quiet quitter, or, there were some other, the side hustler who's, dialing in and working 2 other jobs and doing something on the side. A lot has, been said in recent times about employee engagement and what do teams bring to the table. I think you also gave some, examples of how startups can just totally beat the crap out of legacy companies, and challenger brands can kind of come in and disrupt business models. I think a big part of that is, being on mission and being 100% activated for a cause or a team or a mission. Can you talk a little bit about this 51% principle, and how do we get our marketing teams to err closer to the side of 100% engagement in their projects?
Yeah, so this is a very realistic approach that I take, because as much as we have seen the rise of even employee engagement as a field, we've seen more companies embrace vision, mission, values. But what they're forgetting here is that, look, it's all well and good that you might have a vision for your entire company. And as a founder or a C-suite executive, that's great. You directly get compensated if your company fulfills that vision or mission. But you have to remember, most of your frontline staff aren't being compensated in the same way. And quite frankly, they're being compensated in a way that means they're living, hopefully not fully paycheck to paycheck, but they're still in a mindset of, look, I got bills to pay. I've got to keep working my way up the ladder. I've got to keep improving my skills, because if I don't do that, then I'm in a really financially precarious situation. And so if that's the case, then I take a 3-step approach of how I get the most out of my team members. It is caring about their financial health, their professional health, and their personal health. So let's start with the first. Financial, it's very straightforward. Make sure they're being fairly compensated for their work, and always be the one willing to go to bat for them. You still have to lay out key KPIs, OKRs, and all the rest of those goals that they need to hit in order to be worthy of that compensation. But if they do it, you as a leader should be going to the relevant folks in HR and your senior manager, advocating for them to get more compensation. The next is professional development. Why do people give 51% of effort? Because they're not feeling challenged. They're not feeling inspired to do more. Usually at that point, they're just phoning it in. And all people want to grow if you give them an opportunity to. And you can get very creative with this. I have found many times the key to getting the most out of my employee has just been paying for a $50 or $90 course about a particular skill that they wanted to learn. And yes, do they do it in their spare time? And does it really affect the rest of their output? Not particularly, but it was something they wanted to do. And in the grand scheme of what a marketing budget entails, it's not really that much to spend to get that much more productivity. And the final thing is personal. And this is a hard one, because by no means am I saying you have to be best friends with all your employees. Naturally, there is a power imbalance between you as the executive and your team as your frontline staff. But you need to be diplomatic. You need to understand you're dealing with humans and not robots making widgets. And so some weeks, they're not going to be as productive. Other weeks, they're going to be super productive. And so the way that I like to phrase this is, you need to be able to distinguish when it's time to put the arm around the shoulder, or when it's time to really spur them on into action. You showing that level of emotional intelligence, of being aware that work is only one facet of their life and one of the things that they're considering or caring about in any given day, will pay dividends. I have measured this down to the fact that there are folks who have joined my teams that have stayed with me for years, longer than they would have, and years longer than average retention rates, simply by doing this factor. So if you implement those 3, and it's not easy to do, and it's a lot more work than your standard manager who thinks, oh, I get to manage a team, this is all supporting my ego. No, management is a job, and it's a very important job, because if you do those 3 things right, you will see those team members go from 51% to then 60%, maybe 80%, then 90%, and 100%. Be warned here, don't start pushing them beyond the 120, 130%, because then it doesn't matter that they're that excited, they will burn out. This always happens. It's okay to flex a little bit above, especially if you've got that confidence from your team in your leadership style, but you cannot do it permanently. You need to be able to flex based on the different demands. The way I like to do this, especially within B2B, is I know that summer's a bit of a slow time. So I take the foot off the pedal a bit. But I do that setting the expectation that, hey, September, October, it's a really busy time for us. So I hope you're all rested. I hope you're all charged up, because we're going to really have to go in September and October. And every single time I've done that, I get rewarded by the team putting in the effort.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the idea of thinking about team members as multifaceted, and really like what motivates them from that personal, professional, and financial levers, because they're all important things to pull. And some are way more motivating to other people. Like they just might want extra time off, and you could essentially accomplish the same thing with compensation, but because it plays into this idea of like, yeah, like I like my time off, it's still just moving dollar signs around on a spreadsheet, but it's acknowledging what's important and what's motivating to a team member. So I love that idea. I've often thought about this component because I've seen it both in leading sales teams and also even with the account teams or the sales planning teams or the support folks that end up taking whatever my team puts together and then deploys it. Simple phrase, comp plan dictates behavior. And essentially, team members will optimize to the comp plan. So you have to be very intentional about how you design, commission structures. And for me, I got down to the level of like, how do you design travel and entertainment? How do you justify how much money to put in to acquire the sale with the team being out in the field and doing the wining and dining aspects? I loved hearing about one of your interviews where you convinced the team to get off the trade show conveyor belt and actually like curate these small, intimate dinners, these long, slow dinners with clients, and to not talk about business and really to, focus on relationships and talking about innovation and the industry at large versus trying to, get your hook around somebody like at these dinners. And that was a small marketing experiment that you put into the market and saw a quick win. How can you really be intentional about comp plan and build structures that optimize for those three elements of what you were talking about, where folks are motivated by personal, professional, and financial, but also ties to KPIs, but also the idea that we win and fail as a team versus individuals?
Yeah, so the biggest way that I focus this on is I spread out the bonus that my team members get into two buckets. Because on the one hand, I still want there to be individual KPIs that they feel they can control directly. And my general philosophy, because I'm building out, most of the marketing teams I built out have been from scratch. And so I'm building with particular function leaders in mind. Like I'll build demand first and put a demand lieutenant in charge. Then I will build brand and then have a brand lieutenant in charge, et cetera, as we go through the functions as we scale the business. And so as a result of that, each one needs to control their small little purview because they are an expert and that's why they've been hired. But simultaneously, exactly to your point, I want it all to ladder up to a team-wide goal where you get a pool of money that then gets distributed to all folks should we hit the goals that we're trying to. And more importantly, those marketing goals are not simply, vanity metrics or things that haven't been discussed at the highest levels. Those ladder up into company-wide goals because it's very important, and we've seen this time and time again, the marketing and sales misalignment problem. I think Gartner put it at potentially costing companies over $1 trillion. And like, that is not acceptable to me. But why does it happen? It happens because marketing measures itself one way, sales measures itself another way, and then suddenly marketing's shouting from the rooftops, hey, we've hit our goal, but sales is like, well, none of us have hit our quota. And so there is truth to the adage that more revenue solves all problems, right? It's not the only thing, and we do value especially our operations colleagues who deal with all sorts of chaos and mess that exists in large organizations. But the fact of the matter is, if you have more money, which represents resources, you're able to fix more problems for your company. And so coming back to what you were saying about compensation, it is really important that I try and tilt more of our actions towards achieving the marketing goals that ladder up to the company goals, because I'm trying to incentivize that sort of collaborative behavior. At the same time, it avoids some of the behavior where well, that's not quite in my particular domain and I'm not getting compensated for it, so I'm not going to do that action. If you at least have an incentive based on achieving those larger goals, then suddenly you see it reflected in the behaviors. Because at the end of the day, like, it doesn't particularly matter if one particular channel starts to work better for us than another. Even if you were hired into a completely different channel, you should want that to succeed, because ultimately that will mean more prospects, more pipeline, ultimately converting to more revenue, and then we'll all hit the revenue goals. That has been the consistent theme throughout my entire career, is that every time we hit a revenue goal, everyone shares in the spoils, and every time we don't, we take the accountability of, like, okay, what was wrong? Was it larger than our control? Was it macro forces? Was there something we could do within our control? Was our messaging slightly off? Were the products and services we were putting to market not competitive enough? Like, these are all the types of questions that get prompted. But I think it is really important to still value and feel like your team members can control part of their compensation, but they need to realize that they are part of something bigger than themselves. And that's why those bigger goals are so important.
Yeah, I think that's great. In my last agency, we didn't do any kind of compensation goals tethered to the team. We had those larger strategic plans that laddered down into departmental goals and individual goals, but still all the compensation was locked in at either the department or the team, or the department or the individual goal rather. So I'm gonna definitely noodle on that one and figure out how I can use that as incentive in the future. So I wanted to go into another component of, we're talking a lot today about marketing and really more management strategy, which I thought was pretty exciting based on your background. And we'll get into some tactic stuff, of course. But I love this idea of you talking about, especially in your first 90 days, as defining yourself as a strategic leader versus an operational executor or an order taker, being an important component of having trust within your organization, being able to kind of drive your own success story within the C-suite, not being, just a dumping ground where people drop assignments on your head and then, hope you can finish them in the time allotted. If you're strategic and you're forging your own path and you're coming up with measurable experiments that show bottom line impact, things like you mentioned, sales being the primary measure of any healthy organization, but being able to communicate that up and down and in the terminology and thinking that the C-suite absorbs and can take to the bank, rather than thinking about the vanity metrics, impressions, views, and engagements that so many teams get away with measuring themselves on. Can you talk about this idea of establishing yourself as a strategic leader versus an executor? How do you do that quickly and in a way that makes an impact, especially if you're a new contributor on your team, on your marketing team?
Yeah, so this is very critical for marketing, especially because no other function gets more input from other functions about how it should be operating. No one is telling the finance team how to run a quarter by quarter analysis. No one indeed is telling the sales team which particular sales methodology to choose. But yet, because we are all exposed to marketing on a daily basis, we're all receiving thousands upon thousands of advertisements, either obviously or subliminally. And as a result, it makes everyone feel like they are an expert. And so you've got to set up a couple of key things quickly. One is you do still need to take into consideration those ideas. So what I like to do is set up a Slack channel where anyone can drop those ideas and those will be answered in the order they are received. I also like to put a bit of a burden back on the person asking the idea. So what is the purpose? Who is the target customer? Why should we do this?
Make them fill a brief out.
Exactly. You're just taking the agency model, but you're using it in-house. And it works really well because suddenly it makes them battle test their own idea. Is this actually a good idea, or am I only just saying it to the marketing team because I read one business book yesterday and that spurred an idea, right? Those two ideas are not equivalent. But you do still need to do this because at the end of the day, you're still working with humans, right? And those humans do want to be validated that at the end of the day, they're trying to contribute. They're not trying to be nefarious. They are just trying to help. Now, that's one way how you field the requests. The other side of it is you have to really articulate your strategy early. You have to articulate it in the ways in which people understand. Because at the end of the day, we know that marketing is more art than science. Yes, there have been all sorts of measurement brought into it, but at the end of the day, we still know like what good looks like. And more often than not, it's not because of a particular metric, it's because of a feeling. Like we can all recall like ads from our childhood that made a massive emotional impact on us. Now, I guarantee you, even using today's measurement tactics, that wouldn't necessarily reflect. But we know it's good marketing because it made us feel positively towards a particular brand. You mentioned one of the brands I've worked with, Nike. Like Nike, it spends billions of dollars on brand, not because they can measure all of it, but because they know it creates a certain perception in the mind. And that is really the key to brand. But if I take that into a boardroom, if I take that to my other C-suite members, their eyes are going to immediately gloss over. And so I've been fortunate enough being in the world of technology to develop a way of presenting my experiments, as you say, in the idea of iterating and testing, right? We are going to test, we are going to get some conclusions from that data, and we are going to deploy more tests, and then we'll see which of the various strategies and tactics correspondingly are working best for our customer. Now, in the background, I already have a particular thesis of what I think will work, but by bringing that type of attitude to my fellow C-suite, suddenly they can start to wrap their heads around it. Because like it or not, all businesses are measured in the language of numbers. It is a framework that we have all adopted in which to assess the health of a business. It's not the only way of assessing the health of a business, but it is the conventional one. And so rather than fighting it, which is what a lot of marketers, especially as they're coming into the C-suite for the first time, start to do, they talk about all the different tactics, they talk about all the different ways of doing creative. No, you need to stop with that. You need to focus on like, how do I present what my strategy is going to be in a language that they can understand? Because as soon as they do that, you watch, they get off your case because suddenly it's like, oh, it's okay. Like Patrick has got this part of the business handled. So now I, as a CEO, can go and focus on other areas. We saw this in some of my previous companies where by articulating this strategy in this way, the CEO's time was freed up to focus on some of our delivery issues. And that was really important because we had so much pipeline that we were really struggling to fulfill the needs of our customers on the delivery side. Now, if I hadn't articulated my strategy in that way, maybe my CEO would have had to split his time between us. And that only means more micromanagement for me and my team, which demotivates us. It also means we're not going to be a successful business. So it is really important to sort of keep two ideas in your head as a marketing leader. You need to, on the one hand, know your fundamentals as a marketer and understand like what shapes consumer behavior. This is why I've always been a big advocate of, even if you haven't come from a psychology background, like learning the elements of human psychology, but at the same time, step out of your comfort zone. I know, especially most of you creative marketers aren't going to like this, but you need to understand the world of numbers. You don't need to be able to fill out a whole income statement, but you at least need to know the jargon, know the verbiage, and then be able to use it. Because once you start using it, then you'll see the other C-suite around you start to relax. They're like, oh, it's okay. They're one of us. They understand the language we're using. They understand what we're trying to accomplish together.
Yeah, I love that. I think in another interview, you told a story about how your CEO could come to you and say, Patrick, I'm going to give your department more money because I know for a fact that you have the greatest force multiplier on ROI. If I give you $1, forget what the margin was, but he knew that the number one investment that he could make, at least at that moment in time, macro, was to give that budget to you versus other departments. How do you come up with that ROI calculator? Is it by kind of rolling all the activity of your department up to a common metric, or is that too myopic of a way of thinking about it?
I don't believe it is too myopic, because the fact of the matter is it's really hard to measure a lot of activities in marketing. And so as you go too granular, you end up too much towards vanity. The fact of the matter is you're not going to create world-class marketing campaigns by doing something 1% better. You need to do the order of magnitude better. You need to do 50%, 100%, 150%. Because when you look around, especially in the industries that I've been in B2B, they're all the same. Like, all the brands are doing the same thing, and it just becomes boring. It just becomes noise. And I've always tried to get folks to think in those terms of, hey, what are ways that we can think about doing a campaign from another industry, bringing it into our industry, and then suddenly we're doing something completely different to our competitors and we're standing out, right? Attention is everything. But all of that ladders up to a very simple metric. Now, you're either doing this of one of two ways. If you're in B2B, chances are you're looking at sales qualified pipeline, which has been a metric I've been held to as a team for many, many years now. And you're looking specifically, one, the volume of that pipeline. Two, is it converting at an appropriate clip into like actual opportunities that sales are then nurturing? So that's the most important one for that side. If it's B2C, it's even easier, because marketing for B2C is actually all the way through to revenue. There is no sales team, because when you go and pick up a juice or a roll of toilet paper from the supermarket, you don't have to speak to a salesperson. You pick it up off the shelf and you buy it, right? But all
Yep.
of the things that have influenced you up to that point is all marketing. So this is where I think B2B often lags a little behind B2C, because it forgets that at the end of the day, even if you're not responsible for delivering the end revenue, you are still part of the revenue team. And we have started to see more and more folks compensate their teams from the top, i.e. the CEO, all the way down in those ways, right? So making sure that the marketing team is aware of, we're not just trying to hit MQLs or any of those other data points that, quite honestly, at this point can be gamified. We're trying to get actual growth for the business. And once you think in those terms, then you start unlocking the true creativity in your team. Suddenly your team realizes, hey, you know what? It actually is a good idea to start a podcast, because it doesn't matter that I can't attribute it to leads. If it swells the overall pipeline, and then I've measured based on customer conversations by my sales team in a tool like Gong, oh, I came across you guys because of your podcast. Suddenly you're painting a picture of why people are actually buying from you.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I've never thought of Gong or some of these AI note taker platforms to actually be an attribution tool, because then you start to pick up conversations of what's happening with the sales team. Like, I generally think of those applications as more of like a coaching methodology, where you can kind of see like, where is the sales process breaking? Where is my sales team veering off the core messaging through their game of telephone and the boiler room, and kind of, inventing their own capabilities and things that they can do through just that game of telephone, where a team can kind of veer off messaging points. But yeah, definitely can be used as an attribution tool. Like, where did you find us, or how did you come across, this appointment, essentially? So that's pretty cool. I wanted to ask you about the idea. Another really interesting point that I had heard you talk about is this idea of like, don't do 10 channels. a little bit, really pare it down to three, make sure you get those things correct. And then more specifically on the idea of focus, if you can't hand a channel off to a channel specialist as their essentially their full-time role, like maybe they do a few other things, but if the majority of their time isn't spent on that one channel, then that's probably not a channel that you've quite solved. And you shouldn't be moving on to the next shiny object. I think this is really a great insight for B2B marketers, especially that, like you mentioned, can be resource tapped and sometimes feel like they're so many light years behind their direct to consumer colleagues. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of channel mastery and kind of building a team in and around those channels?
Yeah, so it's very critical to think in terms of mastery first rather than just covering your bases. And the reason you have to do that is because at the end of the day, the most benefits come to the top 1% of anything. This is true of all sorts of fields, and it is even true of companies. Why do we have a big six across many different areas? We have a big six or a big four because those benefits accrue to the top. So, what does this mean for marketing? What it means for marketing is, why would you try and do like 10 different channels or 100 different channels? Because you're going to do each of them in a slightly mediocre fashion. Because, like you said, you're resource strained, but more importantly, you're time constrained. If you have to manage that many channels, are you really going to understand any particular one of them to a level of depth? So, what does this look like in practice? When I came in to it was a small software development agency, it was less than 1 million. And at the time, there was every single channel was being covered. They were doing blogs, they were doing Twitter, they were doing Facebook, they were doing Instagram, they were doing LinkedIn, and it was just recycling across all of it. And needless to say, the activity was, oh, one like here, one comment here. And you could just see it's like, this isn't particularly interesting to me, and I work at this company. So why is it going to be interesting to our audience? I immediately went in and cut everything except for LinkedIn. And I got a bit of pushback. Like, the CEO and the founder was a little worried about this approach. It's like, oh, but shouldn't we do? And I said, we're a 15-person company. I am the solo marketer here. So we're not going to get the desired result, which of course was pipeline. Suddenly, by focusing just exclusively on LinkedIn and doing nothing else, generated 600,000 of additional pipeline in just 6 months. And
Wow.
it became our best performing channel. 40% of our revenue, as we grew to 1, then 2, then on to 5 million, came from LinkedIn. And that all comes from mastery. It only happens that way because then you start to understand the quirks, right? Every single channel, you have like a superficial level of knowledge, then you have a decent expert knowledge, and then finally a master's level knowledge. And once you get that, then you really understand what makes it click. Because every channel is slightly different. Yes, there are people on the other end of it, but we need to remember that all channels, especially digital channels, have algorithms behind them, have little quirks in the code. And those are the types of things that you will only understand if you obsess about learning the channel inside and out. And so it's far more beneficial to go deep in one channel, master it, then hand it off to someone who can continue that mastery while you learn future channels. And so this is how you create a scalable and replicable way for dominating all different types of channels. Rather than if you did the opposite way, where let's just try and cover, blanket the internet, so to speak, and do everything, suddenly everything is a little mediocre, it's not so great, and it doesn't ultimately drive the needle when it comes to what you ultimately want your customers to do. It all comes back to that same concept, like more revenue solves all problems. Like we should be doing marketing activities for the sake of doing activity, because we're the field that can do that. Like I can always create a new website. I can always spin up a social media campaign. I can always do some outreach. I can always do some activity to show I'm working. But am I working effectively? Is my team working effectively? That's what really matters there.
Yeah, I love that. How do you decide which channel to attack first when you come into an organization when you're building a program net new? And how do you decide which channel to go to next once you've done the mastery, handed it off to a teammate, and are ready to attack the next beachfront?
So there's two ways I think about this. The first way is very simple. You can already do a level of market analysis of like simply where is your audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting a very clearly defined ideal customer profile and figuring out where they spend the majority of their time, whether it's particular blogs, whether it's social media, whether it's they prefer in person, whether they prefer online, all of these different ways of interaction. You have to meet them where they are, because at the end of the day, you are focused on facilitating the most easy interaction with your brand from a buyer, right? As soon as you create friction, it's just creating more reasons for that buyer to go, you know what, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going to leave. From there, you can also have a couple of speculative ones. So what do I mean here? These are potentially newer platforms that you're not quite sure whether they'll succeed or whether they won't. And the reason you do that is because they tend at the early stage to be prioritizing volumes of interaction, and it's where you accrue the most benefits. This is the same as the early adopter curve, right? The early adopters of most forms of technology tend to accrue the largest benefits. Then it matures, then and eventually declines. So by doing that, you can put it to your team in that way. And as well, I've done this before where I've put it to my C-suite of saying, look, I'm going to carve out a small portion of my resources. I've already factored in that we will still hit our goals based on our existing budget mix and channel mix, but I have a feeling this might work in the future. So I call it my moonshot. And I fully expect that this might be the next big channel for us or the next big initiative. It could also decline and be worth zero. And by putting it in that way, it makes them understand like, well, if we would build new technology, if we would understand that the world is constantly changing and innovating, why should we not be innovating in our marketing mix as well? It's a tough conversation to have because most people want the reliable, tried and true thing. But as I've articulated to C-suite executives, none of that is ever true, right? Consumers are constantly shifting. Perfect example of this. There was a time when direct mail was absolutely king and it got flooded and flooded and flooded. And then suddenly people thought, that's a bit of a waste, so we're going to cut back on that. And so online became big. Well, right at that point, you started seeing people go back to direct mail because suddenly it was an under-tapped channel, right? You're trying to compete for people's attention. I heard this phrase the other day that I thought was really profound. Your eyes are the most expensive thing that you own. Like that is where you are giving your attention. And more importantly, where your buyers are giving their attention. So if you can capture even a small piece of that and expand that attention, then suddenly you're in with a real shot to convert that into purchases, into long-term client engagements, all the rest that successfully builds your business.
I love that. You've also talked about marketing needing to be an art versus a science, or art and science. And you've also talked a little bit so far in the show about, the idea of brand and how important that is, especially when you're trying to drive recall or an association. You want your B2B brand to be associated with, this level of service or this kind of level of innovation or it helps you with this one task really great, or, with a services company, kind of the prestige that your team brings to projects, and, the pedigree of the types of clients that work with you, et cetera. So there's always this healthy dynamic of the quantitative marketer, also known as the growth hacker, who kind of comes in and can really attribute a lot of individual spend and marketing cycles to direct attribution to pipeline and or meetings or other things that the marketing team can measure, or the overall business can measure. And then you also have this idea of brand. And if you don't build one, it's going to make all these other things way more expensive and harder to convert, because nobody knows who the hell you are, or if they know you, they don't trust you, they don't have a reason to, or you just don't make them feel anything. How do you shift and, in a world that wants to be more and more measurable, how do you play, the scientist and the artist in that tapestry with B2B marketing?
So I think this is where I always give more deference to measurement early on in the stage. And this is where, let's call it the sub 50 million stage, because at the end of the day, you don't have that much capital, you don't have that much cash on hand. Even the best run businesses sometimes only have, 2, 3, 4 million. And with payroll and other costs, that can evaporate very quickly. So I think it's always important to understand that when you deploy the particular mix over time is also dependent on the stage of your company, because it's all well, and I've seen this unfortunately happen where early stage startups hire a brand marketer to lead and they think that's going to be good. Well, it doesn't matter if your effort's going to pay off in 2 years, because we've only got 6 months of runway, right? So it's important to start with the numbers, especially early. However, as you start to build enough of a mature function, as well as build some cash in the bank, this is when you need to go to your C-suite team and you need to stress to them the importance of brand, and not in a light, airy, fairy way, but in a conversion standpoint. This is very critical for your sales team, where you can get them on board with you saying, like, how much greater would it be that you didn't have to explain who we are? How much greater would it be if you were competing against one other service provider or two, as opposed to 10 or 30? Like, these are the types of ways that you can start to build the case for investing in brand. And it's not just that one touch point, because again, like you say, everyone likes to measure everything. So they think, all right, we'll do one brand initiative, like one event, and that'll be enough. It's like, no, we build a reputation over time. Now, you can use adages here that really help people understand that point of, you wouldn't ask someone to marry you on a first date. This is a perfect embodiment of, you need to build the relationship over time. But it is critical that you are able to make that transition into more brand elements. Now, on the flip side, I've been in some very large organizations who have been totally obsessed about brand, and they've only focused on brand, and that's well and good for them. But then they start to lose out to some of their more nimble competitors, because their entire focus is on large, 6, 12-month initiatives, that they forget, hey, you can still build a startup testing and iterating ethos even if you are within a large company. And that, I think, is very critical for people at the largest side of things to also understand, because you want a healthy mix. You don't want it necessarily to be too weighted towards brand, and you don't want it to be too weighted towards what I would call growth or growth hacking, or those sort of measurement type philosophies. So by getting that healthy mix, you're able to hit your targets within the quarter by quarter, but you're also able to set up the brand for much longer success than even you might be accustomed to, because you might have moved on to somewhere else. This is your mandate as a marketing leader, because at the end of the day, no one else is responsible for that function other than you.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I love that dichotomy of size of company and when are you too focused on brand and not focused on fundamentals. I wanted to get back to a question around the channel strategy. How do you determine the budget for these test experiments when you're going into new channels? You had already given a little bit of a illustration into this that you, or I think maybe you talked about this on another show where you take money from something that's the exact same amount and you can kind of like move it without really maybe anybody even knowing that there was a test. Not that you're deceiving anyone, but you're using your own budget at your discretion to try something without, making it a big committee that has to decide on it. And then the other thing that I thought was very insightful is that with all of the rest of your marketing spend, you already know that you're going to hit your KPIs and goals. And this is essentially a carve out that doesn't impact whether you're going to be successful or unsuccessful. So those are both great, I think, high level insights into the innovation end of the marketing channel. But do you have any other insight on is it a percentage of spend? Is it just a kind of a flat number like 25K? Like, how do you go into the test and learn psychology?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things here. So the first big thing is obviously that you've done the work up front to set your marketing budget. And by doing that, it gives, as you say, that wiggle room where you can start to reallocate spend. And you're absolutely right. This is not an intent to deceive. This is a case of you, the CEO or whoever you're particularly reporting to, have given us, the marketing team, this set budget. We are going, hopefully having built enough trust, we are going to spend it prudently in the same way that you would expect your sales team to spend their money prudently, the same way you would expect your product team to spend it prudently. So given that, you've already laid out at least a rough target range, because let's be honest, you're never going to perfectly hit your budget every single month. But from there, you're able to do a series of reallocation. Now, naturally, you generally want to overweight towards the things that you know will hit your KPI, because we know this. The standard tenure for a CMO these days is somewhere between 13 and 17 months. So if you don't hit KPIs, like, very soon you're going to be out on your haunches. And there's plenty of marketers, unfortunately, who are lining up ready to replace you. So you do need to make sure that is set first. The way I like to think about it is generally a 75-25, and then I flex based on, am I getting more or less out of that 75? So what do I mean by that? So generally speaking, I can make 75% of most budgets that I receive hit an agreed upon number that is the KPI. The reason, because obviously I've been involved in those discussions about the KPIs. Now, if I start to see that we're actually hitting those very comfortably, I might start to drop that 75 down to 60 or 50. Now, you may ask, why do you do that if you're already succeeding with that 75? The key is usually that 75 is deployed towards what I would call the most mature channels. These are the channels that have the easiest attribution, but they are also A, the most competitive, and B, tap out the quickest. So what are we talking here? We're talking paid media is a big one. We're also talking like event strategy, funnily enough, can also be another big one. Things that take large portions of your budget quickly, and if you're not careful, can suddenly take the entirety of your budget. Versus those small 25%, those might be the things that get you the outsized gains, but you're not perfectly able to measure it. What are we thinking here? We're thinking podcasts. We're thinking getting a C-suite executive on stage at a major industry conference. We're thinking even like small pop-up activations, things that like are really out of the box, but can honestly drive the biggest impact. You need to carve out enough experimentation, because those underserved channels will often be your goal to not just hitting your goals in a small way, but hitting them in a massive way. And honestly, these are the types of stories that are career defining for you. These are the areas where it's suddenly like, you didn't just grow a company by 10% or 15%, you're growing it by 30, 50, 70%. You're making up the majority of the revenue. If you can do that as a marketing team, you set yourself apart from every other marketer out there. And that not only will be successful for the company you're at currently, but also every other company you help in the future. And that is vital for marketers. A dear friend of mine always said that the biggest enemy of marketing is not sales, it's bad marketers. That's the problem. There's so many marketers out there, and unfortunately, there are many of them who are not up to scratch. So if you can get away from that reputation and show yourself as someone who is a true driver of company growth, you will be very successful in your career.
Wow, I love that. I love the very practical breakdown of allocation and, making sure you do the homework with your executive team, that attainable target is within reach. But really, it's going to be that 25% that's the moonshot idea, the marketing experimentation, and you need enough bandwidth in your team and on your calendar and in your budget in order to find those net new opportunities that are going to be accelerator for your company. So I just love that, because that's where I think that a lot of B2B marketers miss out, because they're just so married to their content strategy or their search strategy or their LinkedIn strategy, which are all important, but you're not going to get much incremental gain out of a lot of those channels without some kind of incremental experimentation. So thanks for those numbers, because I feel like that's very actionable for listeners. So as always, it would not be a marketing podcast if we didn't talk about AI. So I know you guys are over at Formula.Monks. Brady's been on the show as well, talking about his book. And I would love to just get your thoughts on, what's the current state of AI in marketing? How much is it being implemented? How much should we be afraid for our jobs? What I really liked in a prior interview is you talked about AI helping get us out of operational nightmares and allowing us to do more of the things that we love to do as marketers. I'm finding that more and more all the time as a biz dev person in the marketing world. People might hate to hear it, but I get better meetings from my AI outreach than I do from my personal outreach, because it's getting so good at figuring out what the right message is at the right time to the right person. And what that does is allows me to kind of have that component of the business on autopilot, and I get to spend more time in the deep learning or the deep work, which is, I could spend the entire day today preparing for our podcast because, AI is helping me in the background. So can you talk about, some of those operational nightmares that AI is going to get us out of, and what's the current state of AI in marketing as you see it?
Yeah, so I think this is where everyone took the wrong lesson from the early LLMs. They immediately got seduced by, it can write a poem in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet that's actually an Eminem song, or things of that nature. Or when Sora came out and people saw, it's able to generate like kind of realistic video. And naturally that got everyone fearful for their jobs and fearful for, is this going to replace me? Now, ironically enough, that's not really where AI is going to replace, nor is where it is most beneficial. Because think about it, AI, especially when it's based on these LLMs, is simply a set of systems and processes, right? It has learned a bunch of information. You can train it further, and then it spits out a response based on that. Because of that, it's very good at systems type thinking. It's not good at coming up with the out of the box thinking. And you can see this even now. You can see the people who haven't edited the output, it starts to say some of the similar phrases because it's learned on the whole history of the internet, and it's learned, various, admittedly, as a writer, I can say this, mediocre phrasing, and that becomes an immediate tell that it's AI. And that's not what people should be focused on, because once you as an audience member is reading that, you're like, oh, this isn't particularly interesting. But where it is useful, it's useful for some of those big levels of grunt work. So what's an example of this? Perfect example where you might have a particular idea for a piece of LinkedIn content, and you tell it to a voice note. That voice note you can then run through a GPT to turn it into a post that fulfills the requirements and constraints of a LinkedIn particular piece of content. Now, it is still your words, it's just been formatted in a way that's sped up the time. Suddenly, you didn't have to sit for an hour, 2 hours in front of it. You were able to get that out in 5 minutes. The other big area, as we talked about, the operational nightmares. There is still, to this day, a serious amount, especially of salespeople, and I care about salespeople because if they don't spend their time selling, then I'm not hitting my numbers, who are doing their work inside HubSpot, inside Salesforce, of just like updating fields on contact records. And that is ridiculous. Why should they, if we're already having note takers, if we already have sent out the invite to a particular person, and we already have data sources that can clean up all of that data around a particular contact, why is that not being done with simple workflows? Now, there is still operational lift in terms of building those workflows and making sure that you have good people on your operations team to quality check them. But that can be a massive saver of time. You need to start thinking in terms of what are the areas that are creating the most pain for my team members at any given point, because those are the areas where AI is going to make the biggest impact for them. And like you said, unlock the extra time for the human part of it, because that's what I'm worried about. When I look at the next sort of 5 years, I have no doubt that a lot of people are going to be very lazy with AI and use it to create a lot of content that's going to be garbage. But there is a silver lining in this. People will recognize the garbage. And so if you're the person who can be creating the content that is new, unique, exciting, human, because the robots aren't buying our products and services. It's still humans at the end of the day who are buying those products and services. And so if you do that, how can, if I think that the world online is going to be a sea of AI content, how do I make sure my content is the most human possible? That is where you want, especially marketing teams, spending the majority of their time. But why would you make them do the data entry side of it? Why would you make them do the operational workflows? Why would you make them do all the campaign hookups? All of those, quite honestly, are much better done by machines. So let them do what they do best so we can do what we do best.
Yeah, I love that. I love that the best marketing in the future will be the marketing that is the most human. That's a really great insight, and I think something that we can all take to heart as we continue to experiment with AI and leverage it in our day to day. So, all right, Patrick. Well, we're coming down to the hour here. This has been a really great conversation, and I feel like I only scratched the surface of what I wanted to talk to you about today. So perhaps a part two might have to be in our future. But that being said, for the audience today, what are you most excited about over the next 6 months in your role leading the marketing organization across Formula.Monks?
I think for me, and it might sound a little cliche, but it's just seeing how my team develops, improves, and thrives. I really focus a vast majority of my attention. I spend more time in one-on-ones than most people think is necessary, because I really do care about understanding every intricate detail about what my team members want to accomplish. And it's not just about their professional accomplishments, but their personal accomplishments, because that level of care I have seen time and time again. The results take care of themselves, right? I'm a big believer in this concept that we only have a certain small percentage of what happens to us in life that we can control. And most of it is just reacting to the other things that happen around us. And so I know that, look, we might be successful, we might fail. That happens. Companies succeed and companies die. But if I can at least have had a positive impact on every single person who reports to me, I want every single person to, when they leave for something better, to have that moment where, like, oh, damn, why did I leave Patrick? Patrick was the best boss I ever had. If I can achieve that with every single person that I've touched in this life, then I've lived a good life, and I can be very happy with that.
I love it. Well, not just great advice as marketers leading teams of coworkers and colleagues in and around us, but I think that could seep a little bit into humanity. If you can, go throughout your day and the people that you come and encounter, and if you can leave them with a little bit of a better experience than they had before they came across you, I think that might be a nice way to live and a nice way to improve the current state of things in the world. So thank you for that, Patrick. Well, hey, anything else you'd like to plug or point people to, ways to get in touch if they want to learn more and connect with you?
LinkedIn is your number one best bet. So www.linkedin.com/in/Patrick James Ward, all one word. I would love to connect with any and all listeners of this wonderful podcast.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Well, hey, for those of you who are following along at home or in the office or wherever you are watching or listening to the show today, don't forget to follow or subscribe. We would love for you to tune into future episodes. If you have a chance to rate the show in whatever platform you're listening or watching today, those reviews help us find a larger audience. And most importantly, if there's a colleague out there somewhere in the world, a leader of a marketing organization, somebody in agency land, somebody who would benefit from the conversation that I had with Patrick today, don't forget to share the show with them. So with that, we'll be tuning off. And thanks again, Patrick, for coming on.